All countries of the EEA 31 reaffirmed their commitments to this remarkable agreement during an extraordinary session of the European Council to celebrate 25 years of the EEA. I think no one better than Donald Tusk could put it, and let me quote him. Over these years, together with Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein, we have worked as a family, building a better Europe for all of our citizens, and we can be proud of this achievement. The EEA brings us together as equal partners in the internal market, giving access to its 4 freedoms. It also delivers in other major areas like research, technological development, environment, and culture. Today, within the EEA, more than 500 million people are free to move and travel, to do business and invest with ease, to receive education, conduct cutting-edge research abroad, while enjoying the safest consumer protections, the highest standards at work, and the cleanest environment. We have accomplished this through shared pragmatism in a spirit of neighborly cooperations, and we should never take this for granted. The EEA agreement is not a short-term transaction, I like this formula, but a long-term partnership where everyone contributes and everyone benefits. In a world of resurgent nationalism and authoritarianism, in which geopolitical tensions create real threats to our citizens, you, as he addressed the heads of governments of the 3 EFTA states, you have stood firmly on the side of wisdom, the rule of law, cooperation, and deeper integration among our nations. Thank you to President Tusk for addressing these words to us. Dear participants, for a quarter of a century, the EEA agreement has been the fundamental instrument in the relations between the EEA-EFTA states and all countries of the European Union, whether EU member states have been 12 at the origin, 15, 28 today, maybe 27 tomorrow. During the last 25 years, Europe has undergone profound evolutions. And in a world of constant change, the positive spirit of cooperation in the EEA has allowed for adaptations and pragmatic solutions to be found. I think if there's anything that characterizes our cooperation through the EEA, is our common will and determination to make it work. And it did work over 25 years and will continue to work throughout these changes, throughout the enlargement of the European Union, throughout 4 new EU treaties. And you'll get to hear today more specifically what it has meant and continues to mean in terms of its functioning on a daily basis. In addition to ensuring the 4 freedoms, the agreement provides for extensive cooperation, including the participation of Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway in EU programs and agencies, but also parliamentary cooperation, very important. The agreement was signed before the Lisbon Treaty, before the European Parliament was entrusted with the power it has since then, and the agreement was able to adjust and include this development. We also have a structured cooperation among social partners, which is as well an important precondition for an anchoring of this agreement in our civil society. Through their participation in EU committees and expert groups, the 3 EFTA states contribute to the decision-shaping process of relevant EU legislation and programs. This will also be explained to you in more details during today's seminar. The EEA is also a demonstration of solidarity among countries of Europe to overcome shared social and economic challenges. So the EEA and Norway grants our contribution to cohesion in Europe, make a lasting contribution to reducing social and economic disparities throughout Europe, and supporting a free and vibrant civil society, an important objective of our members, which is beneficial for the whole of the EEA. You will get here again in-depth presentation on the grants after the lunch. With this, let me conclude. The EEA agreement is a remarkable achievement and was recently described by the Norwegian Prime Minister as the world's best trade agreement. It has proven to be a long-lasting solution for citizens and businesses across 31 European countries. But this well-functioning of our common internal market demands continuous efforts from all parties to the EEA agreement, including from the 3 EFTA states and the secretariats, but also from our friends from the EAS. And let me greet Angelina, who just joined us. We very much appreciate our cooperation in the functioning of this agreement. So we're thankful to you for your interest to the EEA today. During today's seminar, you will get first-hand information by my colleagues, some of the key personnel of the EFTA Secretariat, but also the EFTA Surveillance Authority, and a representative from FMO, Financial Mechanism Office, the office that runs our cohesion contribution. And before the end of the day, the highlight on our end, you will enjoy a special presentation by the Icelandic ambassador to the EU, who is presently chairing the EFTA Standing Committee, which is the organization that runs the EEA. With this, I wish you a great seminar. I encourage you to interrupt, ask questions, and I'm looking forward to this day with you. With this, shall I hand over to you, Thorn Finnur?
Thank you, Honorary Gita, our Secretary General. First, a few technicalities. Well, the Secretary General sort of went through the program. You, of course, have seen it already. We will start, but just to explain the reasoning behind the program is that after the first two presentations, where you will get sort of an overall view on EFTA and the EEA, we will have a special Q&A session. So if you have questions already, please don't wait until the end of the day. Secretary General will not be here the whole day, so if you have questions on the existing mechanism of EFTA and on a higher level, please come already with those questions earlier on. Then we break for coffee at 10:30 and go into the legal processes. And with the assistance also of, we will explain to you how EU law becomes EEA law, which is quite a mechanism. And then we go into the EFTA Surveillance Authority and the EFTA Court. And like Mr. Zeta said, that we will have the grants and the two-pillar solution. I would like to call it the backbone of the EEA agreement. And the reason why we give it such a highlight here is that we just published this legal notes this summer, so this is fresh from the printer, and we will have an in-depth presentation on that before we have the Icelandic ambassador. Please tweet as well. You have the hashtags here, EEA, EEA seminar, EEA 25 years. But now I will give the floor to Deputy Secretary General, Hege Hof, who will give you a first introduction to the EEA.
Yes. Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this seminar from me as well. My name is Hege Hof. I am also a Deputy Secretary General, and I oversee the work related to the EEA agreement that we carry out here in Brussels. I will give you a general introduction into EFTA and the EEA agreement. Many of the topics that I will touch upon will be elaborated on later on today, so you might find that there will be some repetitions, but I think that my aim is to give you like a frame around what we will discuss later on today. So, let's start. We'll start with the very basics. What is EFTA? Well, you know, as Henri, my colleague here, also already explained, it is the European Free Trade Association. It was established back in 1960s, had 7 founding members at that time: Norway, Denmark, Sweden, Portugal, Austria, UK, Switzerland, of course, not to forget. and to promote then free trade and economic integration between the member states, which today are the four of us. Being established in 1960, you will realize that EFTA has been a part of European integration nearly from the beginning, 2 years after the entry into force of the Treaty of Rome. No, the EEC Treaty. The association is established under the EFTA Convention and has the responsibility, three main responsibilities. First, the management of the EFTA Convention. And the EFTA Convention has the rules governing the association and also rules governing trade between the four EFTA states. Now, as you have already heard, it is only, well, Norway, Iceland, and Switzerland. They are also a party to the EEA agreement. So it will be the EEA agreement that would govern the rules on trade between those three states, unless we are talking about areas that would fall outside the scope of the EEA agreement, such as trade in fish between Iceland and Norway. So the EFTA Convention rules would then mainly relate to trade between Switzerland and the three other states. The association has the responsibility for the management of the EEA agreement in our EFTA pillar. And thirdly, also, when the four EFTA states decide to negotiate free trade agreements together, EFTA serves as a platform for that work. And today we have 29 free trade agreements that have entered into force, and recently also concluded the Mercosur free trade agreements. Now, this is just another way of illustrating the three strands of EFTA cooperations. First, the EFTA at 4, the relationships between all three EFTA states according to the EFTA Convention. And then we have our relations with the EU based on the EEA agreement. And then we have the third country relations, free trade agreements that we have concluded with third countries that are not members to the European Union. And to assist them, the member states have set up the EFTA Secretariat. And we are some, I think, 85 staff members. Where is the picture? There it is. Here we are. Happy bunch of people, just recently at our staff seminar in Ostend. The Secretariat has 3 offices. The headquarters of EFTA you will find in Geneva. And that is where you'll find the Secretary General's office and also our colleagues that work with free trade agreements. We have a small but important statistical office located in Luxembourg. And then we have the EFTA Secretariat here in Brussels. And our core function is to assist the member states in their work related to incorporation of new legal acts into the EEA agreement. We also have, in this, we have an important coordinating role between the EFTA states in their EEA work, and we also we are an important contact point between the EFTA states and our collaborating partners, not least the External Action Service on the EU side. So we also would follow EU initiatives from all the way from the very beginning, when initiatives are adopted, and assess them and process them all the way into incorporation into the EEA agreement. We also do translation and publication. We give legal advice to all kinds of legal questions that come up when we incorporate new legal acts into the EEA agreement. Now this PowerPoint here focuses on the incorporation of new acts. Of course, we do have, we also serve the advisory bodies set up under the EEA agreement. And of course, we have important information work, and we have, of course, an administration, HR, IT, and so on. And you see the nice picture on the right-hand side there. That is our new building under construction over there, where we will, in October next year, move in together with our sister organizations, the ESA, the EFTA Surveillance Authority, and the Financial Mechanism Office. So it will be a great EFTA house. So I don't think I have to explain what the core function of the EEA agreement is, but just for the sake of order, you will find this already in the preamble of the agreement. It is to establish a dynamic and homogeneous economic area based on common rules and equal conditions for competition. To say it short, it means that we, by the EEA agreement, the internal market is extended to the participating EFTA states. And in this internal market, we need to have legal homogeneity. This means that we need to continuously incorporate new legal acts into the EEA agreement. And of course, it also means that the rules, they can not only be the same on paper, we need to also to apply them in the same way, interpret and enforce them in the same way. So we have also set up an institution. We have an institutional setup for the incorporation of new legislation and for the surveillance and judicial legislation. That would be the EFTA Surveillance Authority and the EFTA Court. So, just to have a brief overview of the material scope of the EEA agreement, already mentioned briefly today. We have the 4 freedoms. But of course, in addition, we need also to have common rules on state aid, competition, and public procurement, so that the 4 freedoms are not hampered with other kinds of restrictive measures. And there are horizontal policies. We participate in EU programs and EU agencies, and of course, we also contribute quite a lot to reduce social and economic disparities in Europe. Yes, to complete the big picture, this means that with this scope of the EEA agreement, many policy areas would fall, EU policy areas would fall outside the scope of the EEA agreement, such as the common trade policy, customs union, agriculture and fisheries policies, and other areas that you will see on this slide. However, for instance, even though the common agriculture and fisheries policies is not a part of the EEA agreement, the all food safety and veterinary legislations, EU legislation, is a part of the EEA agreement. So there is no border checks in the EEA when it comes to agricultural products and live animals and so on. And also, for instance, very importantly, the EFTA states, the 3 EFTA states, they are also Schengen members, and there are also many other important areas where there is bilateral cooperation between the EEA EFTA states and the EU. So I have now very briefly mentioned the material scope of the EEA agreement. As Torfinnur mentioned, another important feature of the EEA agreement is its institutional structure. And before we look at the structure, I think it's important to realize that the EU cooperation and EFTA cooperation is two different models of cooperation. So you will have the EU model is based on supranationality, where we have transfer of competence and sovereignty, whereas the traditional EFTA model is a international, intergovernmental cooperation, where there were no transfer of competence, or you would have no common policies between the EFTA states. Also, on the EU side, you would have institutions with defined roles in the decision-making process, whereas in the EFTA model, decisions are taken by consensus between the governments. And finally, also, it is, of course, an important concern on the EU side to preserve the decision-making autonomy of the EU. Whereas on the EFTA side, it has been important to preserve sovereignty, and of course also you have the constitutional restrictions or restraints and concerns to take into consideration. So, in order to fulfill the objectives according to the EEA agreement, and also to reconcile these two different models of cooperation, we ended up with this, which we call the two-pillar structure. It is quite elaborate and unique in an agreement, free trade agreement, or much more than a free trade agreement. This is, and it looks quite daunting. But do not despair. We will look more closely into this later on today, and we will also be given some examples, and it will be elaborated on. But just to explain that the two-pillar structure means that EEA cooperation takes place in two pillars. We have the EFTA pillar with their institutions, and we have the EU pillar with their institutions. And then we have set up common bodies that you will see in the middle here. And the highest joint body of EEA cooperation is the EEA Council. And there the EU and EFTA side meet on a political level twice a year. You will see represented by the Council Presidency and the External Action Service on the EU side, and our foreign ministers on our side. They meet twice a year. Met in May, and then the Romanian Presidency represented the EU side together with Angelina from the External Action Service. And this year it will be the Finnish presidency. And I had a quick glance at the topics that were discussed. What we do is that in that meeting, they would oversee the development of EEA cooperation and also pick a topic to discuss of common interest. And I see that energy and climate is maybe a winner on that list. It has been discussed many times, but of course it is also illustrates the importance and relevance. And for practical purposes, the EEA Joint Committee is the most important joint body. That is where we come together and incorporate new legal acts into the EEA agreement. Also represented by the EEAS, and it will be our EFTA ambassadors in Brussels that meet there. And the highest governing body on the EFTA side is the EFTA Standing Committee. And that is where the EFTA states come together and coordinate their positions before they meet in the Joint Committee, because in the Joint Committee we speak with one voice. We need to agree on the EFTA side before we take decisions. This is also the ambassadors who meet there in the Standing Committee, and the Icelandic ambassador will come later on today to explain about the work of the EFTA Standing Committee, and also maybe also some issues seen from their perspective. And of course, behind this EFTA Standing Committee, there is a whole structure of expert group, working groups, subcommittees, where all actual work takes place before a matter is brought up to the standing committee, and Britt, my colleague, she will talk to you a little bit more about the work there. And then you have the EFTA Surveillance Authority, and the competence of ESA mirrors the competence of the European Commission as far as the scope of the EEA agreement is concerned. Of course, the European Commission has a lot of other competences that ESA does not have. And then we have the EFTA Court, and the representative also from the court will come later on today to talk to you about that. And also, as I explained, we have the advisory bodies there. Yes. So this brings me to the end of my introduction. And we have had the EEA agreement now for some 25 years. An agreement that some might have thought would only be a bridge into EU member states, but into EU membership. Well, for some it was, but for others we have remained happily in the EEA agreement. And well, when I laugh there, I mean it. But you might say that EEA agreement based on the Treaty of Rome, the main part of the EEA agreement has remained unchanged for these years. Whereas the EU, as you said, have expanded, you have had new treaties, reforms, and you have had new areas of cooperation, new competences on the EU side in areas that also would fall under the scope of the EEA agreement. How have we dealt with that? Well, of course, it has posed some challenges. Absolutely. We have come up in situations where it has been difficult to decide, well, does this fall under the scope of the EEA agreement or does it not? Or, well, how do we deal with the competence when you set up new agencies, new cooperation not foreseen when we negotiated the EEA agreement? For instance, new financial supervisory authorities, even with competence to take decisions binding directly for institutions and individuals in our member states. How shall we deal with that in our structure? Well, it has been challenging, and it has meant a lot of work, but we have always found solutions, really. And so that is also why we like to say that over the years the agreement has proven that it is both flexible and robust. But of course, it takes a lot of work, dedicated work. It takes good routines. That is really a major part of it. And it takes competence and knowledge. And that is why I'm so happy to see that there are so many of you here today. We need to spread knowledge and competence on the EEA agreement, and to see that not only those of you who today work with the EEA agreement, but those of you who might start working with it, and also other representatives from different, say, walks of life and sectors. It's good that we have knowledge about the EEA agreement. And especially to see that there are quite a few young people here. We need you in the new generation to join us in this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Hege. Yes, and this is an image you will see again here today. It's sort of showing the friendly side of all this, and the EEA has many nice sides, you can say. So next up is, as Hege mentioned, is our colleague, the Director of Internal Market Division, Britt Helle, please.
Thank you. I guess it's still good morning. Good morning, everyone. It's always a bit sort of overwhelming and extremely positive to see that so many of you have sort of turned up for our biannual EEA seminar. As Hege started off with, it's to sort of divide the task between us, how to sort of introduce the enormous amount of knowledge and details we want to tell you about. Always sort of, it's a challenge not to overlap, but we do overlap, and I think that's a way of, I guess we're not always attentive all the time, so maybe you'll pick up bits and pieces. So, based on my own experience. So I am director of the Internal Market Division, one of the two substance divisions, to say it like that, sort of working actively with the EEA agreement here in Brussels. I will explain to you a bit sort of what we do, sort of what does this structure of formalities and legal obligations actually entail in work. Some of you might be coming from other public administrations, you might be wondering actually what are we doing. Sort of how, yes. And in order to explain what we're doing, I would just like to, sort of this is a visual presentation of the processes on the EFTA side and on the EU side when it comes to incorporation of a legal act. More in detail, actually the part about how EU law becomes EEA law is something that my colleague Eridor Steinasdottir, our legal officer, will go through, but it's necessary to go through this a little bit before I explain what we do. So we are really the receiving end of what's happening on the EU side. That is quite clear. We do not take initiatives in this setting. We sort of follow what's going on the EU side for quite some time. So here on the left-hand side, it's really the sort of proposal and decision phase of the EU legislative process. And then we'll talk about adoption and entry into force. It's on our side. So when the EU is preparing legislation with initiatives, green papers, white papers, and so on, until it becomes a proposal in the Commission, this is actually where we have a possibility to, we have a place around the table in the Commission expert groups, which is something which is part of the agreement. And this is something which has now been going on for 25 years. So I would say that our experts, they do have quite a bit of expertise, both in their fields and in how to actually contribute to this system. But it's not easy, because we're not the only ones. The question that might come up later here is actually, to what extent do you are you heard? I would say that when experts have something that they're experts in, then the EU system, the Commission, is very willing to hear. But it needs to be relevant, and it shouldn't be sort of only a national interest. It should be something that serves the common purpose of good legislation. When this is going on, so we have our national experts coming from the capitals, joining these groups. There's also a bit of informal influencing, and maybe this is where actually the Secretariat has a role to play through our structures, that we inform of what is going on in on the EU side, and if necessary, we target places and platforms where we should be and maybe voice our opinions. So it's only when the act is adopted on the EU side, when it has gone through the co-decision procedures with the co-legislators, the Parliament and the Council, that we actually start our formal process. And we like to say that, or we would like it to be that way, that we should use as much time on what we call the decision shaping and the decision making. But I think it's fair to say that there's such an enormous volume of acts that we spend quite a bit of time on the incorporation. That means the work that happens after adoption on the EU side. Yeah, that's a teaser, maybe. This is the structure of the Standing Committee. As you might have seen from the slide on the two-pillar structure, the EFTA Secretariat doesn't appear there. We are servicing the Standing Committee of the EFTA states. That's our role. So the Secretariat as such do not have any mandate to act on our own. We are sort of facilitating the work of our member states, the government structure of our member states. The work on the EEA agreement is really divided into three layers. We have the working groups, the subcommittees, and the standing committee. And here in the Secretariat, these two substance divisions that I mentioned, the one I'm responsible for, the Internal Market Division, and the coordination division, we have divided this task between us. So the servicing the working groups and subcommittee 1 to 4 is something that happens in my division, while the servicing of the political bodies and the formal procedures of actually incorporating the acts takes place in the coordination division, which also serves the subcommittee 5, which is on legal matters. I'm not sure whether you can read this slide, it's sort of a bit blurry. The working groups there that I mentioned under each subcommittee deals with one of the freedoms within the internal market. So we have goods, services and capital, persons, and horizontal policies and flanking areas, which would be the program participation, and the areas that are sort of facilitating the internal market, like environment, consumer protection, and so on. I have this number, sort of 30 working groups established. I would say that only 25 of them are active today. So in my division, there are policy officers dealing with each of these sectors, or maybe some of the sectors clustered together. The working groups consist of ministry officials from the capitals that are experts in their fields or have a coordinating role within their ministry. And they meet 2 to 3 times physically in Brussels and sometimes also in the capitals. But that doesn't mean that these groups only work when they meet. Actually, they are the receiving end of all the sort of procedural forms and so on that we send out in order to get the different steps of the procedure leading to incorporation to happen. So they are working pretty much full time on the EEA in sort of different strands. So the Secretariat here, we organize these meetings. We facilitate contacts with EU officials on these sort of sectoral issues that might arise. The officers here will be sort of screening what's happening, sort of new initiatives, interesting people to talk to. And then, of course, there's also an important work going on in these working groups to align the 3 EFTA states' positions. Because as been said by Hege, there's no mandate given to the sort of Secretariat, to the Standing Committee as such. Each state come with their position, but we still need to talk with one voice towards the EU side. In the subcommittees, they meet sort of 1 week before the Standing Committee, and subcommittees and Standing Committee meet from 6 to 8 times a year, more or less with sort of a bit 4 to 6 weeks interval. And this is where the actual decisions to incorporate happens. So the subcommittee in a way prepares the work of the Standing Committee, and the subcommittee consists of the foreign ministries. So that's the coordinating level. The foreign ministries in our countries, they have a coordinating role, and maybe that's where the overall picture of the status of the agreement is dealt with. So as I will come back to later, we have some challenges with regard to the speed of incorporation, sort of priorities and so on. That's something which is discussed in the subcommittee. And here we meet with the EU side, with our colleagues from the EAS, and there's a very close cooperation. Sometimes we call each other sort of counterparts, but I think we're more partners into the endeavor of sort of ensuring that the agreement actually functions on a sort of systemic basis. I think that's what I would like to say here. Hege already mentioned that there are, well, this is the sort of substantial work to get to a decision to incorporate. But when you come up to sort of, when that decision is ready, there's a lot of work involved in translating the decisions, preparing for translation of the actual legal acts in the member states, the preparation of the EEA Council, the preparation of the Standing Committee, and that takes place in this, the EFTA Coordination Division. But in a way, the substance is what is being done by the working groups. So as I already mentioned, we sort of decide our work into decision shaping and decision making. We would like this to be quite balanced, and it all depends on sort of how much is on our table, how much we do, but also, of course, what is of relevance for our states. Because it's quite clear that influencing in the sort of EU bubble, I think there's a lot of people really sort of doing full-time this. We have to pick very carefully what policy fields are important for us and where we have a chance to actually make a difference. So what are our means of decision shaping? I already mentioned these Commission expert and comitology committees where we have a role, we have a place, we're invited to participate. It's very important. There's another sort of formal way of voicing our opinion that I call the EFTA comments. That's a sort of position paper with a common position from the EFTA states. This is something we try to use as much as we can. I think last year there were sort of 10 comments that were actually sent over. I think we can say that today we are actually sending out a new comment, which is a more horizontal one on the future of the internal market. This is a way we have points to make. We need to flag our existence, because that's also an effect of being here for 25 years. Of course, the agreement is bigger. I think we have our sort of cooperation, which is better than ever with the EU side. But unfortunately, those persons that negotiated this agreement, most of them are not here anymore. So in order to actually spread the news to all the services of the EU that we need to be aware of our existence, that's quite a job. And I would say that the EFTA Commons is also a means of this outreach. We have seconded national experts in the Commission that might not be so known for people in general. That we have the possibility to actually second experts from our national administrations to work in the Commission from 2 to 4 years in important areas of policy making that are sort of relevant to the EEA, but also on a bilateral basis for each member state. Of course, these national experts, when they work for the Commission, they work for the Commission. They are not attached to the national administrations, but they come into the Commission with knowledge about our countries, and they go out of the Commission with a great network which can be used afterwards. So this is actually quite an important part of how we integrate. EFTA working groups and dialogue with EU officials. Then I'm referring to these frequent meetings we have where we invite in the EU experts and we sort of share our views and increase understanding. And then there's a lot of informal contact with European Council and Parliament. And this is very much done by our missions here in Brussels. And then, as has been said, we have a new venue on the program this time that actually the Icelandic ambassador will give a view on actually how they work as a representative of the EFTA states. And it's actually Iceland who has the chairmanship of the standing committee this year, so that's why Iceland is first one out. On the decision making, I will not go into more detail. I will just give you a view of actually the volumes that we're talking about. Since the signing of the agreement, we have incorporated more or less 12,500 legal acts into the agreement. For each of these acts, there is a process and loads of sort of papers going back and forth in order to ensure that it's the member states who actually sort of put forward what they need to do and the decision to incorporate. All of these acts are not enforced, but as you know, the system is renewed, acts are repealed, and there are reviews. So we estimate that around 6,000 of these acts are enforced. So that's actually what we're doing. The EA, yes, it's static. It hasn't changed much. Also, when I say it hasn't really changed since '92, but there has been this addition of the food and veterinary field. I think it was in I can't remember, 96, yeah. And that is, should be mentioned because it's actually, increasing the scope. And today, actually, that field actually represents more than 40% of the legislation we incorporate. It's a huge field. And that's what permits our sort of trucks going back and forth and other transport means from Iceland, of course, that we do not need to do the veterinary checks. Our systems are completely conform, even though we do have some sort of customs or on certain products still. More. That's how it is. So that's the static part of it. The dynamic part is then that we incorporate legal acts continuously. And the aim here is to ensure homogeneity so that the same rules should apply in our countries as in the EU member states in the whole EEA. So we have this aim for timely incorporation, and then we have the challenge of sometimes it is complicated. And I think if I were to define my job, it's really to try to, that the Secretariat should never, or our processes should never be a bottleneck, while we need to take careful care and consideration of the fact that when there are political issues in our member states, they need to be taken care of. Sometimes it cannot go as quickly as we would like to. I look at our partners in the EU side, there's understanding for this. This is the example that we tediously sort of pick out, because it was really a, I would say, a breaking point in the EEA, I would say. Because as our agreement hasn't moved since '92, the EU has. And the creation of these financial supervisory bodies on the EU side, there's one for banking, one for occupational pensions and insurance, and one for securities and markets. This was a response by the EU of the financial crisis to increase the financial supervision, to sort of incorporate the cross-border character of the financial markets. This was adopted in the EU in 2010, and it took us quite some time in order to find the solution to incorporate these financial supervisory authorities into our structure, into our two-pillar structure. Because no power can be given to the EU pillar, we need to find our way of dealing with this within our pillar. So today it is the EFTA Surveillance Authority that has the sort of decision-making power in very close cooperation with the EU bodies. But this is something which will be treated more in detail later. So it took us 6 years, and I can say that since that we have been struggling with the legal acts that actually sort of came thereafter. I'll come back to that in my next slide. And now just to sort of tell about our job, when it's done, well, then there's new legislation coming. And now these ESAs, the sort of legislation establishing these three bodies, is under review. It will be adopted quite soon. And we have been following that process very closely and hoping that there will not be sort of new powers given to these authorities that would actually make it even more difficult for us to find a good solution. As it looks now, we don't see a lot of sort of problems, and we are really on the ball in order to avoid the situation that we had in 2010. I guess as any public administration, how do we actually measure our performance? We are constantly looking for key performance indicators, which is a bit difficult because, as you've seen from the presentation, we are very much on the receiving end of actually what's happening in the EU and what is relevant for the agreement. So we are measuring our processes, and we are reporting very carefully on these processes to our member states. But we have also made this measurement of the volume of acts that we are dealing with, actually what we have managed to incorporate, and also some measure of the acts that are delayed, which then would be a sort of problem regarding homogeneity. So this is an overview of processing volumes, we're called, from 2013 until today. Actually, I should mention that 2019 is not a complete year, so I think we will be rocket high towards the end here. The green columns are actually the EEA relevant acts identified on the EU side, so that's what enters into our system. The blue column is what we have incorporated or what has been excluded. There's the sort of light blue here, which is actually in the end does not need to be incorporated. The orange line is the number of acts that are outstanding in process of incorporation, where the entry into force has already passed on the EU side, but where we have not incorporated yet. That is what we have called the backlog. I say have called, we still call it, but I don't think it's true to say that the whole number of outstanding acts is actually something which is delayed. Parts of it is just a natural consequence of the agreement, the fact that we only can start our incorporation process when it has been adopted on the EU side. This takes from 4 to 6 months, whatever we do. But then when we have political issues in our member state where it's difficult to incorporate for various reasons, then it can take much longer. So if today we have a number of outstanding acts around 500, 200 of these are what we count as our, sort of, I need to be a bit careful how, natural backlog, that is sort of outstanding recent acts. But then we have a number of more or less 300 acts that are outstanding and which are old and which is a problem for the homogeneity. As you see, there was a very sort of dip in that red line. In the beginning of 2019, this was one of the last batches of the financial services legislation, which had been delayed because of our delay incorporating the ESAs. In our next meeting now in the Standing Committee, we will incorporate another 50 acts of those financial services acts. And this is really what we're working on. So the efforts of the whole system, whether it's the EAS or the Secretariat on the substance level, I think is very much focused on this sort of dealing with the older acts, while also keeping up the work on the new legislation coming from the Commission or from the EU side. So it's a never-ending story. But it's challenging. It's important for our member states, for our economies, and I think in general, anybody working here as a secretariat, we feel that we're doing something which is really worthwhile. I think I'm not sure how I'm doing on time. On time?
You're fine.
I'm fine. That's good. Maybe I can sort of. I will also end with this joyful poster of the EEA, which was a product of last year. Audhild will sort of come back to this. When I said that one of our challenges is to actually explain and inform about what the EEA is about, this was a product where we wanted to make this process that we have started to explain accessible for the public or for people that need to know in our ministries or for the Brussels environment, whoever who wants to know what actually happens within the EEA. So this is the front page of what we call the EEA tool, which explains how EU law becomes EEA law. And I think this is also, okay, this was for the 25th anniversary. It's a sort of a bit, maybe not childish, but at least it's a fun way of explaining it. And I think that's, it also reflects the fact that this is a dynamic environment and that it's a lot of good work going on. And our cooperation with the EU side, the EAS, is excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Britt. So we are going to allow for questions now. Maybe just before we do that, thing is that our Secretary General referred to nice words from Donald Tusk earlier on, and I can show you just a very short video when our prime ministers, the prime ministers of the EEA EFTA states, met leaders of all EU member states last spring to celebrate the 25th anniversary. All right, that was in the EU Council, as you could see. So let's try to have some dynamic here and some questions, and maybe the speakers could come up here. And please stand up and ask for the microphone, whatever you want to. There's a microphone over there, and another one. Okay, here's the first question. And state your name and where you're from.
Hi, Manuel Boss from the Swiss Mission. So thank you very much for this presentation. So I'd like to know more about the incorporation of new acts actually into the agreement, and we as Swiss are always very interested in how other people do that and other nations. So if you don't agree, let's say, with one of the acts, what do you do? Like, what are your options you would have during that incorporation phase? Is there any? And maybe if you could tell us a little bit more about dispute settlement. About the dispute settlement. That'd be nice. Thank you.
Thank you. You will also touch upon this issue in your introduction, maybe. But of course, nothing can be decided unless the two parties agree. And what we do is that at all times we need to come together and discuss. And as I say, we do find solutions. But you know that you could, for instance, you need adaptations to a text. For instance, if there are special circumstances in the EEA EFTA states that you need to take into consideration, you could agree on an adaptation, or exceptionally an exemption. Yes, I will leave it at that. But you know, we always try to agree and to discuss.
I think it's important to say the details. So this is something which comes in the presentation. That's why we haven't gone into the details.
But there is an elaborate dispute settlement system set up under the EEA agreement, where the parties come together for a political dispute settlement system. It's not a judicial, but it's a political. They can come together in the EEA, in the joint committee, to seek solutions. And there is an obligation on the parties, always try to seek solutions.
I think this is an important point that underlines the functioning of the EEA much beyond all the mechanics. Is that both the EU and the EFTA member states want that to function. There's a fundamental and lasting political commitment on both sides. And the reality is that where there are issues, they are taken seriously on both sides. And then we look for solutions and find solutions. So the whole debate you're implicitly referred to about the country being forced against its will into something it doesn't want, is just not the reality we experience and we've been experiencing for 25 years.
All right, we have a question here. Please.
I'm Nicolette Geef. I have a question, but maybe I did not hear when it was already told. The common trade policy, you told me, is outside the EFTA agreement, more or less. What happens then with all those controversial treaties at the moment, like CETA, TTIP? What happened with, what influence did have the treaty with the Ukraine, which allowed to import to the European Union, and of course it's a back door, I think, to your countries. And on the other hand, different treaty, ACTA, that has been digged up.
Thank you for that. The EU is a customs territory of its own, with its own trade policy. Each of the EFTA states are customs territory of their own. So it means that whatever the EU does or agrees upon with other countries is only relevant for the EU itself. There's no backdoor trade or some whatever Ukraine product going into our countries through the EU and vice versa. So that's why we're saying that we're not part of the common trade policy. We have our own trade policy towards third countries, and we have, as Helge said, some 30 free trade agreements covering 40 countries, because we have some with group of countries. So we conduct our own trade relation with these non-European partners ourselves, oftentimes in parallel, sometimes in competition with the EU. And in terms of the substance of the nature of the third country agreements, you mentioned CETA or the association agreement the EU has concluded with Ukraine, they are on a different page. The content of trade agreements, as much as they have deepened and broadened over the last decades, they not at the level of integration that we know and experience in the EU, so and in the EEA for that matter. So there are two different sets of agreements that do not determine each other.
All right, there's a question over here.
My name is Odd Kodal. I'm from the Mission of Norway to the European Union. And it's probably a question, I got two questions. One is probably in the same vein as the previous question, and that is, you have a common market, but then how is it possible then to make free trade agreements with third parties, so to say? And the other question is with regard to the working parties and the role of sectorial ministries. I guess there's a MFA was having an important role, but what about the sectorial ministries whose areas are touched upon in these directives?
Will you take the first one, please?
Try it. There are limitations stemming from the EEA as to the kind of things we can agree with third countries, like as we completely harmonize our legislation in the field of veterinary prescriptions, for instance, and as a result have one common area where food products circulate with no control. We can't have similar agreements with third countries because that would affect the conditions of circulation of this product within this common area. So there are such limitations. But on the other hand, take a simple example of custom tariffs. We trade with the US, both the EU and the EFTA, on WTO ground, meaning we have to pay tariffs when exporting to the US, and the US products have to pay tariffs when exporting into our countries or into the EU, and we can, or we could, if we wanted to, and if the other side wanted to decides to lower these tariffs to a lower level. And that would apply in our respective territories without affecting the circulation of products within the internal, the common market. So, in a nutshell, there are limitations in substance as to what we can do, but there's a whole range of issues where we can and we have effective benefit in agreeing with third countries. Another field is, for instance, the protection of intellectual property or patent protection, an issue that has so far prevented us from agreeing with India on a free trade agreement, just to name that example. And your other question, I will give
the role of the
line ministries.
Line ministries. I will start and you can... Well, because I am so glad that you asked that question. Because, of course, the most important ministries are the line ministries, you could say. In the day-to-day work related to the EEA agreement, it is the line ministries who takes the biggest part of that work, really. And it is exceptional when it comes to an international agreement that normally it would be... it is exceptional that an international agreement is so much a part of the day-to-day work of the line ministries. So yes, they are, I could say, the most important ones in the daily work. Would you like that? And of course, they participate in all the working groups.
That was what I was
and
just to maybe if we go back, is it on?
Yeah.
On the slide, sort of with the structure under the standing committee, actually the working groups, they're really working with the sectoral ministries. So the officers here in the Secretariat, they are in very close contact with the experts from the line ministries. And everything is sort of sorted out there before it comes up on this subcommittee level where the foreign ministries are represented. So it really, it's very, I don't think it's right to say bottom up because it's not the bottom, but it's sort of from the substance expertise, that's really where it happens. And it's also the experts from the substance or the sectoral ministries that participate in the Commission expert groups.
And many of the directorates also. They also, of course.
Directors also, yes.
Okay, just to, because you asked about free trade relations, it's not the substance of this seminar, our third country relations, but on our website you find this free trade map for EFTA, and it has, like, the light blue colors are where we have existing free trade agreements with third country partners around the world. The last one to be added to that is Indonesia. So we have 29 agreements globally with 40 partners. And the next one, and the color will soon change in Latin America from green to light blue as well, with Mercosur. And so you can easily find this on the website. But and speaking of the different models with the EU, is that that while the EU countries they always make agreements as a bloc with third country partners, our member states, they are also free to make the bilateral agreements if that happens, and it has indeed happened where we have the light yellow colors in China and Japan, where Iceland and Switzerland have bilateral agreements with China and Switzerland as well with Japan. But that's maybe not the substance of this seminar today because we are focusing on the EEA. Okay, further questions? Yes?
My name is Ragnar Haraldsdóttir. I come from the Icelandic embassy. There was a slide previously that where we could see that 12,600 acts have been incorporated. That is, EU acts have been incorporated on the basis of the EEA agreement. I was just wondering, has anyone ever calculated the percentage of the total of EU acts that you know, the EU is producing acts and regulations, an enormous amount? What is the percentage that the EFTA states are incorporating? Has anyone ever?
Yeah. So you mean from all?
Yeah, from all.
Yeah, like there are so many things that fall outside of the EEA.
Yes.
This we have actually tried, yes, but it is a bit tricky, just to be honest, because there are acts that are repeatedly falling out of and also the number does not necessarily tell the whole story. Some of them are very tiny technical acts, and you can make a graph and come to some conclusion that is maybe not totally the reality. But we have heard like only 15% or something like that as a rough figure. Do you have better?
But can you imagine, for instance, the common agricultural policy? I would imagine it's an area where the EU has a vast amount of regulations, for instance. So it's a little bit. I wouldn't say comparing apples and pears, but I mean it doesn't give really.
The whole national legislation.
Yeah, but just the whole EU, if you can't.
I was thinking about this.
Foreign
There was
policy
a
and
Norwegian
security.
report given in 2012, where it was looked into actually all the relations that Norway had to the EU. But then I think it's very important to say, okay, the EEA is part of it, but then of course you have Schengen. I think there's an enormous volume of acts going through the Schengen system, and also then certain areas of the internal market which is not applicable to us. But anyway, in that report, it said that sort of we're part of more than Norway is actually sort of 75% part of the EU system. That's quite a bit. But I'm not sure what part of this the EEA actually stands for.
No,
so I think, as I
it's
said,
a lot
apples
lower.
and pears. I don't think it's relevant anyway.
Yeah.
But it's a big chunk of the internal market legislation. I don't know whether maybe the EAS has made this calculation.
Actually, I know that the Icelandic foreign minister, he's very keen on repeating that this is only between 15 and 20%. Maybe the ambassador will say something this afternoon. Actually, there's a big report coming out in Iceland on the EEA cooperation in a couple of weeks' time. But I'm sure that there are more questions. There's one here, and then the next one over there.
Hello. Thank you very much for an interesting presentation. My name is Harpa Sivarnasdóttir. I work for the European Commission, but I'm here exclusively in a personal capacity today, just out of curiosity. I was wondering if you have sensed any kind of impact in the cooperation between the EU and EFTA member states following Brexit. And also I was curious, now that President-elect von der Leyen has published the mandate letters, does that have any kind of impact on the work that you're doing? And maybe a final question, as part of your KPIs, is there any kind of public perception survey that's carried out about the work of the EFTA Secretariat, or? Sorry?
Sorry, I didn't hear your question. Satisfaction.
KPI.
Oh yeah, as part of your sort of KPIs, you had the graph that you showed the number of acts that you have been working on, but is there any kind of public survey, public perception opinion that you carry out in relation to the work that you do as part of your KPIs? Thank you.
On the UK, if anything, it's growing interest for what we're doing. There are some parallelisms. There are lots of speculations, most of them wrong about Brexit and us. But obviously, what we're doing has grown in interest in recent times. I would keep it at that. When it comes to the work of the future Commission, as Britt has said, we have produced an extensive the EFTA comment on how we see the development of the internal market. It's a way of making the point that we're part of this journey, that we consider that to be our common internal market. We have used to bring into the process. It's a paper of a couple of pages, 8 to 10 or so. So it's fairly general, but it's important for our own for the understanding of ourselves, our own understanding in the process, and the message we give to our EU partners that we feel concerned. We have views. Our views are not revolutionary. Usually, we're not all alone with our views in the concept of the different voices in the EU. I think this is kind of our contribution to the work also of the future Commission. And I have not looked in detail into the mission statements, but I don't think I've seen anything that contradicts our views and expectations. So we, in that respect, very much mainstream in the concept of voices here in Brussels. And then your last question, I can't remember, but I will gladly hand it over to our friend. Well, just to say that, as both of my colleagues clearly indicated, we serve our members. So the work of the Secretariat is relevant to them, and we are very mindful of their needs and expectations, and we do conduct surveys with our members and our stakeholders about their satisfaction. But it doesn't reach the general public. When it comes to the general public's sentiment and attitude towards the EEA, this is basically the job, the domestic political job of our members. Do you want to add anything?
Maybe just that's would be in line with what I would like to say as well. Of course, we did mention our outreach activity to try to actually our contribution to the, I don't think we should say the public debate, but we would like to contribute with factual information about what the agreement is about. But that's where our mandate ends. With regard to your question, sort of whether we follow, of course, the new Commission and the setup of President intellect. We do, because our structure of the working groups and actually how much resources we put into each field is very dependent on what's coming up on the EU side. So for example, one of the very sort of interesting developments these days, and which is also dealt with in this comment that will be published tomorrow, so we're a bit out of line here to say anything about it, is for example how to deal with the digital agenda. Is that something which is kept within one sector, or is it now something which is completely horizontal and goes into everything? In the EFTA structure, we have one working group dealing with, it's called ECASIS, nobody understands what it is. It's Electronic Communication, Audiovisual Services and Information Society. Well, do we need to sort of spread that thinly out, or do we keep our structure, for example? So we definitely follow very closely what's going on so that we're able to cope with what's coming. So I think that would be my...
Was the next question over there? Yes. Yes, okay.
My name is Jordi Casanova. I'm working for ESA. I also had a Brexit-related question. One can see from the slides that you have on what the EEA does and does not do, that there are some similarities to what the voters have demanded for the UK. For example, to have an independent trade policy, also to rely more in intergovernmentality rather than supranational institutions. So I was wondering whether there is a common position from the EEA states about the possibility of the UK joining the EEA, and what would be the main challenges of the UK joining the EEA agreement in your view?
Well, the straight answer, there is no common position because the question is not on the agenda. And the UK has never shown any intention. They certainly have thought that through, but they came to the conclusion it's not the way they want to go. So it's end of the story. What we've been doing on the issue in the previous years is, as the UK is leaving the EU, they're leaving the EEA as well. So we have worked on our own withdrawal agreement. We have worked on our own preparedness in case of hard Brexit by way of bilateral safety net kind of agreements like that, as well as integrating into the EEA the preparedness legislation that the EU has itself elaborated as far as that legislation is relevant for the EEA.
Yeah, was that okay? More questions? Would you like to address from the EEA? Yes.
I just want to thank, because it was mentioned a few times, the excellent cooperation we have as External Action Service. My name is Angelina Eichhorst. I'm here, a guest and an observer as you are, but it's true that we work on a very daily basis with representative of, the quote was mentioned of the Prime Minister of Norway, but we all feel that this is an extremely successful agreement we all have together, 31 basically, 28 and 3, and it's not known enough. So I'm very, very glad that there are seminars as we see today, and so many efforts done by the Secretariat and by the whole team to make sure that people know why it is so important, to work. So we will continue. There was a question on how it would look in the future. We have a lot of discussions internally, of course, with the upcoming Commission, also with the External Action Service, on how we organize our work in the future. But my sense is that clearly the way it was laid out on your beautiful organigram, this will stay, because you don't bring things that work actually very well, and this one works extremely well interinstitutionally. So thank you for all the fantastic cooperation we have, but thank you for the interest you have in the EEA EFTA work. Thank you.
All right. Yes, there is room for one last question if you have, but maybe you're just thirsty. exhausted, warm, hot, or sweating or something, I don't know. Anyway, there will be lots of more. Okay, one last question over there, and then there will be more questions, opportunities for questions. And of course, during the coffee break, please talk to us and everybody you see from the Secretariat.
I'm Letitia Dieger. I'm observer as well by profession. I'm a lawyer, but I'm just out of personal interest here. I have two questions. They're rather maybe impertinent, I don't know, but I'd like to tell them or ask them anyway. So concerning the cooperation in the EFTA, in the two-pillar structure on financial supervision, what were the most important issues, the major issues for you? And the second question, which might a little bit be interesting also or related, is concerning Brexit. You say very, well, it sounds to me very harshly, it's the end of the story. I just read a lot of interesting things about Norway and the Second World War and the relations with Britain. So I just want to ask you, I'm a Belgian by nationality, so it's not out of any personal interest with Britain, but it's just by interest, because as a EU citizen, I just maybe don't understand it that well. So I'd like to know, is there no interest for the EFTA, considering the UK participated to the EFTA creation in the very, very beginning? It's a long time ago, surely, but it's not so long ago after all. Is there no interest in a strategic point of view for EFTA and its member state, and certainly for Norway, Iceland, to keep the UK, and certainly in respect with your major role in NATO these last years? So maybe it's very important. I'm sorry, but as a EU citizen, I really like to have an answer to that.
Thank you. No, it's not impertinent. I'll let you answer on the question on financial services. The question that was asked before is whether the UK might join EFTA and EEA, and the answer is straight and simple: no. To start with, again, they have not shown any interest in that so far. This being said, you're right. The relation of each of the EFTA states with the UK are very important. The UK is the largest export market for Iceland. It's a very close partner to Norway. Norway and in the field of defense, they have a very strong cooperation in the region of North Atlantic. The Swiss and the UK have very strong relationships as well. So the future relation of each of our states with the UK is an important issue, and we will devote a very great attention to that. But as you know, the future, that very future is very, very uncertain. So there's not much we can say at the present juncture. But of course, our member states will take a very close care of their future relation with the UK, whatever the conditions will be, given the uncertainties today.
Financial supervisory authorities. The most important issue was, of course, the importance of participating in this structure from the EFTA state side, because it is an important part of the financial services market. So that was number one. But when it came to issues that needed to be discussed, I think seen from a matter of principle point of view, it was the core question was the competence of these bodies to adopt decisions with direct binding effect upon the financial institutions in the EFTA pillar in light of the fact that we have this two-pillar structure and that we have not transferred competence to the EU bodies. So how shall we make sure that the decisions can be made also towards the EFTA states if need be, but where in this structure shall we place that competence? And in the end, it was decided that the EFTA Surveillance Authority would have that competence to adopt these decisions. But of course, in a very close cooperation with the EU side, and also of course taking part in all the work that is carried out in these institutions. I believe that our colleagues who will talk about the two-pillar structure later on today will explain more about this. What are the issues at stake, what are our concerns, and what are the solutions we have found in some of the most important issues. I don't know, you are from the Ministry of Finance, aren't you, or no? I was looking at you over there, yeah? No, you're not. Okay. So I was wondering whether there would be anyone from our member states here that work with this file. Okay.
You mean that it changes the direct effect for the whole agreement, or just for the financial institutions?
Yes, that's a good question. This needs to be solved on a case-by-case basis. So no general competence transferred, case by case. Of course, we have the competition area, for instance. There we have one very general area where the EFTA Surveillance Authority has the competence to adopt binding decisions and fines. But apart from that, it is on a sector or case-by-case basis where we need to find solutions. But of course, if we already have a solution that works well in one case or in one sector or one act, and if we think that this is a good solution also for another sector or act, then we can of course use that solution.
Yes, and actually for this case, it took some 4 years to find that political framework solution from 2010 until 2014, and then which is actually the main reason why these acts are lately incorporated, but at the moment on a high speed, you can say, finally. So I think we should break now. You can of course ask your questions later on. Please enjoy coffee and fresh air. I think we need that as well. We resume again at 10:45.
Thank you for coming.
Ég var bara að uppdata fyrir mig. Mér langar að vera í Atlanta en það er bara gjörsamlega ómögulegt. Þannig að ég ætla að fara upp á skrifstofu í 2 tíma. Það er til að ég komi svo bara aftur seinni í dag.